The dust hung thick in the air of Agua Caliente, Arizona. The day Laura Jean watched her husband's coffin lowered into the hard ground, knowing that the consumption that had taken him would leave her alone with 3 hungry mouths to feed, and not a single skill to keep them alive in this unforgiving territory. It was May of 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the small gathering of mourners who had come to pay their respects to Thomas Jean, a shopkeeper who had tried his best to make an honest living in this dusty corner of the Arizona territory. Laura stood there, her black mourning dress already gathering the fine particles of earth that seemed to permeate everything in this place, her 3 children clustered around her like frightened birds. Emily was 10, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gentle eyes. Jacob was 8, thin and serious beyond his years. And little Sarah was only 5, too young to fully understand that her papa would never come home again. The Reverend spoke words that Laura barely heard, something about dust and ashes and the kingdom of heaven. She wanted to believe in heaven. Truly she did. But right now all she could think about was how she would pay for the flour and salt pork they would need to survive the week. Thomas had been sick for months, and the medical bills had drained what little savings they had managed to accumulate. The shop had been sold to cover his debts, and now all Laura had was a small trunk of belongings and the clothes on their backs. As the mourners dispersed, offering quiet condolences and promises of prayers that would not put food on the table, Laura felt the weight of her situation settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. She had been raised as a lady in Charleston, educated in music and needlework and French, skills that were utterly useless in the harsh reality of frontier life. Thomas had swept her off her feet when she was 18, promising her adventure and a new life in the West. She had loved him desperately, enough to leave everything she knew behind. Now, at 28, she was a widow with 3 children and no idea how to survive. Mrs. Jean. The voice belonged to Mrs. Henderson, the pastor's wife, a round woman with kind eyes but little means of her own. "I know this is not the time, but have you given thought to what you will do now?" Laura lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity even as panic clawed at her chest. "I will find work, of course. I can read and write. Surely someone in town needs help with correspondence or bookkeeping." Mrs. Henderson's expression was sympathetic but doubtful. "The territory is not kind to women alone, dear. Perhaps you have family back east who could take you in." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Laura's family had disowned her when she married Thomas against their wishes. She had burned that bridge 10 years ago, and there was no going back across it now. "We will manage," Laura said firmly, though she had no idea how. 3 days later, she stood in the offices of the Agua Caliente Gazette, the town's weekly newspaper, trying to convince the editor that he needed someone to help set type and manage subscriptions. The editor, a grizzled man named Peterson, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Mrs. Jean, I appreciate your situation, but this is physical work. The type is heavy and you would be on your feet all day. Besides, I cannot pay enough to support 4 people. I am stronger than I look, Mr. Peterson, and any wage would be better than none." He shook his head. "I am sorry. I truly am. But I need someone who can also handle the press, and that requires significant strength." Laura left the office feeling the first real tendrils of despair creeping into her heart. She had tried the general store, the hotel, even the saloon, though that had been a last resort that had earned her nothing but improper suggestions from the owner. No one wanted to hire a widow with no practical skills and 3 children to feed. That evening, as she rationed out the last of their bread and cheese, Emily looked at her with those 2 knowing eyes. "Mama, are we going to be all right?" Laura forced a smile. "Of course, darling," Everything will work out, you will see." But that night, after the children had fallen asleep on the thin mattresses in the corner of the single room she had rented above the livery stable, Laura allowed herself to cry. Silent tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand, knowing that tears solved nothing but unable to stop them anyway. Meanwhile, on the other side of Agua Caliente, in a sturdy adobe house on the edge of town, another family was struggling with their own grief. Daniel Kade sat at the wooden table he had built with his own hands, staring at the 3 plates of uneaten supper while his children picked at their food in silence. His wife, Margaret, had been gone for 6 months now, taken by a rattlesnake bite that had turned septic before the doctor could arrive from Tucson. The venom had not killed her, but the infection that followed had, and Daniel had watched helplessly as fever consumed the woman he had loved since he was 19 years old. Now he was 32, a cowboy who had worked hard to build something stable for his family, and he was failing at the most important job he had ever had, being both mother and father to his 3 children. Thomas was 12, named after Daniel's father, and the boy was trying so hard to be the man of the house that it broke Daniel's heart. He had seen the boy crying in the barn when he thought no one was looking, and Daniel did not know how to help him process the grief when his own felt like a wound that would never heal. Mary was 9, and she had stopped smiling the day her mother died. She went through the motions of her chores, helped with her younger sister, but the light had gone out of her eyes. Daniel had tried to talk to her to draw her out, but he was a man more comfortable with horses than with the tender emotions of a young girl. And little Rose was 6, still asking when Mama would come home, not fully understanding that the answer was never. Daniel had tried to explain had taken her to the grave, but in her child's mind, Mama was just away for a while. The house, once warm and filled with Margaret's laughter and good cooking, now felt hollow and sad. Daniel did his best with meals, but his skills lay in driving cattle and breaking horses, not in making the kind of nourishing, comforting food that children needed. The laundry piled up until he tackled it in grim determination, getting the clothes clean but ruining more than one garment in the process. And the children, his precious children, were slipping away from him a little more each day. He had hired a woman from town to help for a while, but she had quit after 3 weeks, saying the work was too much and the pay too little. Another had lasted only a week before declaring that she was not cut out to be a nursemaid. Daniel was running out of options and running out of hope. "Papa," Thomas said quietly, breaking the silence at the table, "we heard that Mrs. Jean, the shopkeeper's wife, is looking for work, the one whose husband just died." Daniel looked up from his plate. "Thomas Jean, I heard about that. Consumption, was it not?" "Yes, sir." "They say she has 3 children and no money. Mrs. Henderson was talking about it at church." Daniel felt a pang of sympathy. He knew what it was like to lose a spouse, to suddenly be left alone with the weight of caring for children while drowning in grief. That is a hard situation. "Maybe," Thomas said carefully, "maybe she could help us, and we could help her. You need someone to care for Mary and Rose and keep the house, and she needs work to feed her family." Daniel considered this. It was not a bad idea, actually. He could certainly use the help, and if this widow needed employment, it could be a solution for both of them. But the thought of another woman in Margaret's kitchen, using Margaret's pans, sleeping under Margaret's roof, it felt wrong somehow. Disloyal. "I do not know, son. It has only been 6 months. Papa," Mary spoke up, her voice small and uncertain, "I miss having clean dresses, and Rose needs someone who knows how to braid hair properly. You try, but—" she trailed off, not wanting to hurt his feelings. Daniel looked at his daughters and saw the truth in what they were saying. He was failing them. They needed a woman's touch, a woman's care. And this Mrs. Jean, she needed help just as desperately. Maybe it was not about being disloyal to Margaret. Maybe it was about doing what was best for the children. "All right," he said slowly. "I will ride into town tomorrow and speak with her, but I make no promises." The next morning, Daniel cleaned himself up as best he could, put on his good shirt and rode into Agua Caliente. He had asked around and learned that Laura Jean was staying in a room above the livery stable, a fact that made his jaw tighten. That was no place for a woman and 3 children. He climbed the narrow stairs and knocked on the door, hat in hand. When it opened, he found himself looking at a woman who was younger than he had expected, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes that held a mixture of wariness and exhaustion. She was thin, too thin, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. "Mrs. Jean, my name is Daniel Kade. I wonder if I might have a word with you." Laura looked at the tall cowboy standing in her doorway with confusion. She did not know this man, though she had seen him around town a few times. He had a strong, weathered face and kind eyes, the kind of man who made his living with his hands and his back. "Mr. Kade," she said cautiously, "how can I help you? May I come in? I have a proposition that might be of interest to you." Laura hesitated, then opened the door wider. The room was small and sparse, with little furniture and less comfort. 3 children sat on one of the mattresses, watching him with wide eyes. Daniel took in the scene with a single glance and understood exactly how desperate this woman's situation was. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Jean, I understand that you are looking for employment." "I am," she said, lifting her chin with pride despite the shabby surroundings. "Do you have work available?" "I do. I am a widower with 3 children, and I need someone to help with the house and the children. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, that sort of thing. In exchange, I can offer you a proper room in my house, meals for you and your children, and a wage besides. Not much," he added honestly, "but enough to help you save something for the future." Laura stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You are offering me employment as a housekeeper, and to care for my children, yes. They need a woman's touch. My wife passed 6 months ago, and I am not doing well by them on my own. I have a son, 12, and 2 daughters, 9 and 6. They are good children, but they are grieving, and I do not know how to help them." There was such honest pain in his voice that Laura felt her heart constrict with sympathy. This man understood loss just as she did. "Mr. Kade, I must be honest with you. I was raised as a lady. I can read and write and play the piano, but I am not skilled in housekeeping. I am learning, but I am far from expert." Daniel almost smiled at that. "Mrs. Jean, I can barely boil water without burning it. If you can do better than that, you are more skilled than I am. And my children need someone who can teach them their letters and numbers. You can do that, cannot you?" "Yes, of course." "Then we have the makings of an arrangement. What do you say?" Laura looked at her children, saw the hope beginning to dawn in their faces, and made her decision. "When would you like us to start?" "Today, if you are willing. I have a wagon outside. We can collect your things and be home by midday." It seemed too good to be true, and Laura felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. But what choice did she have? This was the first real offer of help she had received, and she could not afford to turn it down out of fear or false pride. "Then we accept, Mr. Kade, and thank you." Daniel nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "No need for thanks. You will be earning your keep, and you will be helping my family as much as I hope to help yours." Within an hour, their few belongings were loaded into the back of Daniel's wagon, and Laura found herself sitting on the bench beside him as they drove out of town toward his ranch. Her children sat in the back with the trunk, and she could hear them whispering excitedly among themselves. "I should tell you about my children," Daniel said as the horses pulled them along the dusty road. "Thomas is responsible and serious. He has been trying to take care of his sisters, but he is still a boy himself. Mary has not smiled since her mother died. I do not know how to reach her. And Rose still does not fully understand that her mother is gone. She asks for her every day." Laura heard the pain in his voice and felt it echo in her own heart. "My Emily tries to be brave for her brother and sister. Jacob has nightmares. And Sarah, she is so young. She knows her papa is gone, but I do not think she understands what that truly means yet." They rode in silence for a while, two people bound together by grief and necessity, not knowing that this arrangement born of desperation would change both their lives forever. The Cade ranch was larger than Laura had expected, with a sturdy adobe house, a barn, corrals, and pastures stretching out toward the distant mountains. It was clear that Daniel had worked hard to build this place, and she felt a flicker of respect for what he had accomplished. As the wagon pulled up to the house, 3 children emerged onto the porch, watching with curiosity and apprehension as strangers arrived at their home. Daniel helped Laura down from the wagon, his hand strong and steady, and then lifted down her children one by one. For a moment, the 6 children simply stared at each other, sizing one another up. "Thomas, Mary, Rose," Daniel said. "This is Mrs. Jean and her children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah. They are going to be staying with us. Mrs. Jean will be helping with the house and your schooling, and I expect you to make them feel welcome." Thomas stepped forward and offered his hand to Emily. "Pleased to meet you," he said formally, and Emily shook his hand with equal solemnity. Mary hung back, but Sarah, never one to be shy, walked right up to Rose. "Do you want to see my doll?" she asked, pulling a worn cloth doll from her pocket. Rose's eyes lit up, the first sign of real interest Daniel had seen in weeks. "I have a doll too," she said softly. "She is inside." The 2 little girls headed into the house together, and Laura felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Maybe this would work. Maybe, somehow, these 2 broken families could help each other heal. Daniel showed Laura to the room that would be hers, a decent-sized space with a real bed and a window that looked out over the pastures. "The children can share the room next door," he said. "It has 2 beds. I hope that will be suitable." "It is more than suitable, Mr. Cade. It is generous." "Please call me Daniel, and I will call you Laura if that is acceptable. We will be living under the same roof after all. Formality seems unnecessary." "Laura is fine," she agreed, though she felt strangely nervous using his Christian name. "I will let you get settled. Supper is usually at 6. I will warn you now that the kitchen is a mess. Margaret had a system for everything, but I have lost track of it. Feel free to organize things however makes sense to you." After he left, Laura stood in the center of the room and took a deep breath. This was her life now. She was a housekeeper for a widowed cowboy, living in his home, caring for his children along with her own. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but then, very little about her life had gone according to plan. She could hear the children in the next room, her 3 and his, talking tentatively, beginning to explore this strange new situation. She sent up a silent prayer that this would work, that she could do this job well enough to keep her family fed and housed and safe. That first evening was awkward and strange. Laura ventured into the kitchen and found it exactly as Daniel had described, a mess of unwashed dishes and disorganized supplies. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work, grateful that her mother had insisted she at least observe the servants in the kitchen when she was a girl, even if she had never expected to do the work herself. She made a simple meal of beans and cornbread, nothing fancy but edible and filling. When she called everyone to the table, She found herself presiding over a table of 6 children and one quiet cowboy, all of them watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and hope. "Let us say grace," she said, bowing her head. It was something Thomas had always done, and she wanted to maintain that tradition for her children's sake. She said a simple prayer of thanks for the food and for the roof over their heads, and when she looked up, she saw Daniel watching her with an expression she could not quite read. The meal was quiet at first, everyone too uncertain to talk much. But then Jacob asked Thomas about the horses he had seen in the corral, and Thomas launched into an enthusiastic description of the ranch's animals. Soon the children were chattering away, the ice beginning to thaw, and Laura felt another small knot of tension loosen in her chest. After supper, she washed the dishes while Daniel went out to check on the animals. The children played in the main room, and she could hear them laughing, an unexpected sound that made her eyes prickle with tears. When had her children last laughed like that? Daniel returned as she was drying the last plate. "That was a good meal," he said simply. "Better than anything I have managed in months. It was nothing special. It was to us." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know this arrangement is unusual, Laura, 2 families thrown together by circumstance, but I think it might work. I hope it will." "I hope so too," she said softly. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Laura woke early to prepare breakfast, packed lunches for Daniel to take out to the range, and spent her days cleaning, cooking, and minding the children. She taught them their lessons in the afternoons, gathering all 6 around the big table and drilling them in reading, writing, and arithmetic. She discovered that Thomas was bright and eager to learn, that Mary had a gift for numbers, and that Rose loved stories above all else. Her own children blended into this routine easily, Emily helping with the younger ones, Jacob following Thomas around like a devoted shadow, and Sarah becoming inseparable from Rose. Daniel left early each morning and returned at dusk, tired and dusty from working cattle. He was quiet by nature, not given to unnecessary conversation, but Laura began to notice small kindnesses. He always thanked her for meals. He fixed a broken shelf in her room without being asked. He brought wildflowers in from the range and put them on the table, saying the children might like them. She found herself watching for his return each evening, listening for the sound of his horse. She told herself it was because she needed to know when to put supper on the table, but there was more to it than that. There was something solid and reassuring about Daniel Kade, something that made her feel safe for the first time since Thomas had died. It was not attraction, she told herself firmly. It was simply gratitude and relief at having found a stable situation for her children. Nothing more. But late at night, lying in her bed and listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, she sometimes allowed herself to think about the man sleeping in the room down the hall. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with strong hands and broad shoulders and eyes that were kind even when he was tired. He was a good father, patient with his children even when he did not know what to say to them, and he had saved her family when no one else would. She pushed those thoughts away. It was too soon, too complicated. She was here to work, to earn her keep and provide for her children. That was all. Daniel was having similar thoughts, though he would have denied them if asked. He had not expected Laura Jean to be so young or so lovely, even worn down by grief and hardship as she was. He had not expected to like the sound of her voice as she read to the children in the evenings, or the way her face softened when she smiled at something Sarah said. He had loved Margaret with all his heart, and the guilt he felt at noticing another woman made him withdraw even further into himself. It was too soon. It was wrong. Margaret had been gone only 6 months. What kind of husband would he be if he allowed himself to think of another woman so soon? but he could not help noticing the way the house had come back to life. The kitchen was organized and clean. The laundry was done and folded neatly. The children were learning their lessons and playing together like a real family. And at the center of it all was Laura, working tirelessly to make a home for all of them. One evening in late June, about 3 weeks after Laura and her children had arrived, Daniel came home to find chaos. Mary was crying in the corner, Rose was hiding under the table, and Laura was trying to comfort both of them while also preventing Jacob and Thomas from coming to blows over something. "What is going on here?" Daniel's voice cut through the noise, and everyone froze. Thomas and Jacob stepped apart, both looking guilty. Laura took a deep breath. The boys had a disagreement about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. It escalated, and then Mary got upset because, she paused, glancing at the girl, because today would have been her mother's birthday. Daniel felt his heart clench. He had forgotten. How could he have forgotten Margaret's birthday? He crossed the room and knelt beside Mary, pulling her into his arms. "I am sorry, sweetheart. I should have remembered." Mary sobbed against his shoulder, and he held her while she cried, feeling like the worst father in the world. When her tears finally subsided, he looked up and saw Laura watching them with such compassion in her eyes that it took his breath away. "Why do not you take the girls outside for a walk?" Laura said gently. "I will handle things here." Daniel nodded gratefully and led his daughters out into the evening air. They walked to the small family cemetery on the hill where Margaret was buried, and they sat there together as the sun set, talking about her and remembering. It was the first time Daniel had really talked to his children about their mother since she died, and he realized what a mistake that had been. They needed to remember her. They needed to know it was all right to grieve. When they returned to the house, Laura had supper ready and the boys settled down. She had also made a small cake, simple but sweet, and she served it with quiet ceremony. "I thought we could honor Mrs. Kade's memory," she said softly, "if that would be all right." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. This woman, who had never known his wife, who had her own grief to carry, had thought to do this for his children. "That would be very all right," he managed to say. They ate the cake and shared memories of Margaret, and Laura listened without judgment or jealousy, simply offering comfort where she could. Later, after the children were in bed, Daniel found Laura on the porch, looking up at the stars. "Thank you," he said, sitting down beside her. "For what you did tonight, for remembering." She was their mother, Laura said simply. "They should be allowed to remember her and celebrate who she was, just as my children should be allowed to remember their father. You are a wise woman, Laura Jean. I am a mother. It is the same thing sometimes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "I have been thinking. The children are growing attached to each other. Your 3 and mine, they are becoming like siblings. And I think that is good for all of them. But I want to make sure you understand that your position here is secure for as long as you want it. You do not have to worry that I will suddenly decide I do not need your help anymore. You and your children have a home here." Laura felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Daniel. You cannot know what that means to me." "I think I can," he said quietly. "I know what it is like to be afraid for your children's future. I know what it is like to feel helpless, and I am glad that we can help each other." As summer deepened, and the days grew hotter, the household found its equilibrium. The children were thriving, growing brown from the sun and healthy from regular meals and the security of a stable home. Emily had taken to helping Laura in the kitchen and was becoming a skilled cook in her own right. Thomas and Jacob were inseparable, working together on chores and exploring the ranch. And the 3 little girls, Sarah, Rose, and Mary, had formed their own tight bond, playing elaborate imaginary games and reading together in the shade of the big cottonwood tree by the creek. Laura had settled into her role with more confidence. She had learned to manage the household efficiently, to stretch the budget for supplies, to preserve food for the winter ahead. She had even taken on some of the garden work, planting vegetables and herbs that would serve them well in the months to come. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, she had started to heal. The sharp edge of her grief had softened into something more bearable, a sadness that was part of her but did not consume her. She found herself smiling more often, laughing at the children's antics, taking pleasure in small things like a well-made loaf of bread or a clean house. Daniel was changing too, though he fought it harder. He caught himself looking forward to coming home at the end of the day, to seeing Laura's smile when he walked through the door, to sitting down at a table laden with good food and surrounded by happy children. He noticed the way her hair caught the light when she stood by the window, the grace of her hands as she worked, the sound of her humming as she went about her tasks. He tried to tell himself it was only natural to appreciate someone who had brought such order and peace to his home. But he knew, deep down, that it was more than that. He was falling for Laura Jean, and he did not know what to do about it. It all came to a head one afternoon in August when a stranger rode up to the ranch. Daniel was out mending fences in the far pasture, and Laura was alone with the children when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a well-dressed man dismounting from a fine bay horse. "Good afternoon," he called out, removing his hat. "I am looking for Mrs. Laura Jean. Would that be you?" "I am Mrs. Jean," Laura said cautiously. "How can I help you?" The man climbed the porch steps and handed her a card. "My name is Robert Hastings. I am an attorney from Tucson. I have been searching for you on behalf of your late husband's family." Laura stared at the card, her heart beginning to pound. Thomas's family. I was not aware he had any family still living. His uncle, Cornelius Jean, passed away 3 months ago. You were not aware? No, I was not. Thomas never spoke of his family. I was under the impression he had none. He was estranged from them, yes, but his uncle left a substantial estate, and you and your children are the heirs. Laura felt the world tilt around her. "I am sorry, what?" Hastings smiled. "Mrs. Jean, your late husband was the nephew of one of the wealthiest merchants in the Arizona territory. When Cornelius died, he left his entire fortune to Thomas's children, with you as the trustee. I have been trying to locate you for weeks. You have inherited a considerable sum of money as well as property in Tucson." Laura had to sit down. This could not be real. It was too fantastic, too much like something from a novel. "How much money?" she whispered. Hastings named a figure that made her gasp. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, enough to secure her children's futures for their entire lives. "I will need you to come to Tucson to sign some papers and take possession of the estate," Hastings continued, "but I wanted to deliver the news in person. Congratulations, Mrs. Jean. Your days of hardship are over." After Hastings left, promising to return in a week to escort her to Tucson, Laura sat on the porch in a daze. The children gathered around her, asking questions, but she barely heard them. Her mind was reeling with the implications of what she had just learned. She was wealthy. She did not need to work anymore. She could take her children and move to Tucson, buy a fine house, hire servants, give them the kind of life she had always wanted for them. She could leave the ranch. Leave Daniel. The thought hit her like a physical blow, and in that moment, she realized the truth she had been hiding from herself. She did not want to leave. She did not want to take her children away from the home they had found here, away from the makeshift family they had built. And most of all, she did not want to leave Daniel. She loved him. Somewhere between the shared meals and the quiet conversations on the porch and the way he was so gentle with all the children, she had fallen in love with him. And now, just as she was realizing it, she had to choose between financial security and the home she had found here. When Daniel came home that evening, he knew immediately that something was wrong. Laura was quieter than usual, distracted, and she barely touched her supper. After the children were in bed, he found her sitting on the porch again, staring out at the darkening landscape. "What happened today?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Something is troubling you." Laura took a deep breath and told him everything. About the lawyer, the inheritance, the fortune that was now hers. She watched his face as she spoke, trying to read his reaction, but his expression remained carefully neutral. When she finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. "That is wonderful news, Laura. Your children will be provided for. You will never have to worry about money again." "Yes," she said quietly. "When will you leave?" The question hung in the air between them. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. "I do not know. I have not decided if I will." Daniel turned to look at her, surprise breaking through his careful composure. "Why would you not? You have just been handed everything you could possibly want. Financial security, a chance to live in comfort, opportunities for your children. Why would you stay here, working as a housekeeper, when you could have all that?" "Because," Laura said, her voice breaking, "because this feels like home. Because my children are happy here. Because your children need me. Because she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Because you what?" Daniel's voice was intense now, urgent. "Because I have come to care for you," she whispered. "Because leaving would break my heart." Daniel stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch and back. "You cannot stay here out of some misplaced sense of obligation, Laura. You cannot throw away this opportunity because you feel sorry for me and my children." "It is not pity," Laura said, standing to face him. "Do you think I am so foolish that I do not know the difference between pity and love?" The word hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Daniel stared at her, his chest heaving. "You do not love me. You cannot. It has only been a few months. You are still grieving your husband." "I did love Thomas," Laura said, her voice steady now. "I loved him very much, and I will always carry that with me. But grief does not mean my heart stopped working, Daniel. It does not mean I cannot feel new things, want new things. And what I want is to stay here with you." Daniel closed his eyes, fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, the emotion in them took Laura's breath away. "I have been trying so hard not to care for you. It seemed wrong, disloyal to Margaret. But every day you have been here, you have made my life better. You have brought light back into this house. You have helped my children smile again. And I have fallen in love with you despite every attempt not to." Laura felt tears streaming down her face. "Then ask me to stay. Do not let me go to Tucson and build a life without you in it." Daniel crossed to her in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "Stay, Laura. Please stay. Not as my housekeeper. I want you to stay as my wife. I want to build a life together, to raise all 6 of our children as one family. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. Stay with me and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," Laura breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Daniel pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like coming home. His lips were warm and gentle, and Laura felt something inside her that had been broken begin to mend. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "The children," Laura said suddenly. "We should tell them. They deserve to know." "Tomorrow," Daniel said, pressing another kiss to her forehead. "Let us have tonight, just the 2 of us, to be happy." They sat together on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about their plans. Laura would still go to Tucson to settle the inheritance, but she would come back. They would marry in the fall, after a proper engagement period. They would use some of the money to expand the house and improve the ranch, and the rest would be saved for the children's futures. The next morning, they gathered all 6 children together and told them the news. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Sarah asked the question that was on all their minds. "Does this mean we get to be a real family?" "Yes, sweetheart," Laura said, pulling her daughter close. "That is exactly what it means." The children erupted in cheers and hugs, and Laura and Daniel watched them with tears in their eyes. Thomas shook Daniel's hand solemnly, man to man, and then hugged Laura tight. Emily kissed them both on the cheek. And the younger children danced around them in circles, too excited to stand still. Over the next few months, everything changed and nothing changed. Laura made her trip to Tucson with Daniel accompanying her, and they spent 3 days managing the legal details of her inheritance. She met with lawyers and bankers, signed countless documents, and took possession of the property that had belonged to Thomas's uncle. She sold most of it, keeping only a few investments that would provide steady income. While they were in Tucson, Daniel took her to a jeweler and bought her a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I know it is not fancy," he said as he slipped it on her finger, "but I wanted you to have something that was from me, not from your inheritance." "It is perfect," Laura said, holding her hand up to watch the diamond catch the light. "I would not want anything else." They returned to the ranch and threw themselves into preparations for the wedding. Mrs. Henderson helped Laura make a new dress, soft blue calico with lace at the collar and cuffs. Daniel spruced up the house, adding a new room for the boys so they would not be so crowded, and fixing everything that had been neglected during the difficult months after Margaret's death. The wedding took place in late October, when the brutal Arizona heat had finally broken and the air carried a hint of autumn coolness. The ceremony was held at the small church in Agua Caliente, with most of the town in attendance. Laura wore her blue dress and carried wildflowers that the children had picked. Daniel wore his Sunday best and could not stop smiling. The Reverend spoke about second chances and the mercy of God in bringing 2 hurting families together. When Daniel and Laura exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the church. The children stood beside them, all 6 of them, and when the Reverend pronounced Daniel and Laura husband and wife, the children cheered as loudly as the adults. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food contributed by half the town. There was music and dancing and laughter, and as the sun set and the stars came out, Daniel and Laura snuck away from the party to have a quiet moment alone. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought I would be again," Laura said honestly. "When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days just surviving, just getting by. I never imagined I could feel this way again." "I know what you mean." "After Margaret, I thought I would never love anyone else. I thought that part of my life was finished. But then you walked into my life and everything changed." "We were both so broken," Laura said softly, "but somehow we helped each other heal." "The children did that," Daniel said. "They forced us to keep going, to keep trying, and in doing so they brought us together." Laura smiled. She had 3 kids who needed a father, and he had 3 who needed a mother, and the cowboy saw that. "And he fell in love," Daniel added, kissing her gently. "Do not forget that part." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. 6 children under one roof made for chaos and noise, and the occasional conflict. There were arguments over chores and disagreements about bedtime and moments when both Daniel and Laura wondered if they had taken on more than they could handle. But there was also laughter and love, and the deep satisfaction of watching their blended family become something real and strong. The children stopped referring to each other as step-siblings and simply became brothers and sisters. Emily and Mary became best friends, sharing secrets and dreams. Thomas taught Jacob everything he knew about horses and cattle. And the three youngest girls were inseparable, a trio of mischief and imagination. Daniel expanded his cattle operation using some of Laura's inheritance, buying more land and hiring a few ranch hands to help with the work. Laura used her education to start a small school at the ranch, teaching not only her own children but also several from neighboring properties. She discovered that she had a gift for teaching and found deep satisfaction in it. In the spring of 1880, Laura discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous at first, wondering how another child would fit into their already full household, but Daniel was overjoyed. "Another blessing," he said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Another piece of our life together." The children were excited too, all of them eager to help with the new baby. They spent the summer preparing, making blankets and clothes, setting up a cradle in Daniel and Laura's room. Laura gave birth in November to a healthy baby boy. They named him Matthew Daniel Kade, and he became the center of the household, doted on by 6 older siblings and 2 parents who had learned through loss how precious life truly was. As Laura recovered from the birth, lying in bed with Daniel beside her and their infant son sleeping peacefully in his cradle, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had stood beside her husband's grave, terrified and alone with no idea how she would survive. Now she was surrounded by love, by family, by everything she had ever wanted and more. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "About how strange life is, how it can break you and remake you into something you never expected to be. 2 years ago, I could not have imagined this, any of this." "You miss your old life, the one you had before Thomas died?" Laura considered the question carefully. "I miss Thomas. I will always miss him. He gave me my first 3 children, and I will always be grateful for that. But this life, the one we have built together, it is richer and fuller than anything I could have had before. I would not trade it for anything." Daniel leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Laura Kade. I love you with everything I am." "And I love you," she whispered back. "You saved me, Daniel. You and your children, you saved all of us." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "That is how it works." The years rolled on, bringing their share of joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. The children grew up strong and healthy, educated and loved. Emily married a local rancher's son when she was 20 and gave Laura her first grandchild. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself to be as capable and hardworking as his father. Mary discovered a talent for music and teaching, eventually opening her own school in Agua Caliente. Jacob joined the cavalry for a few years before returning to the ranch to work alongside Thomas. Rose married a doctor and moved to Phoenix, though she visited often. And Sarah, the youngest of Laura's children from her first marriage, became a teacher like her mother, dedicating her life to educating children on the frontier. Matthew grew up as the baby of the family, spoiled by his older siblings but taught well by his parents. He eventually studied law and became a judge, bringing honor to the Kade name. Daniel and Laura grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They expanded the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory, but their proudest achievement was always their family. All 7 of their children grew into good, decent people who contributed to their communities and raised families of their own. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house that had once held two grieving families now overflowed with children and grandchildren, with laughter and music and celebration. As Laura stood on the porch watching the festivities, Daniel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. 25 years, he said. It seems impossible that it has been so long. And yet I can still remember the day you knocked on my door above the livery stable, offering me a job. I was so scared and so desperate. I had no idea that you were offering me a whole new life. I had no idea either, Daniel admitted. I thought I was just hiring a housekeeper. I did not know I was meeting the love of my life. Laura turned in his arms to face him. They were both gray now, with lines on their faces and age spots on their hands, but when she looked at him, she still saw the handsome cowboy who had offered her hope when she had none. You remember what you said to me the night I told you about the inheritance. When I said I wanted to stay. I said I wanted you to stay as my wife. I said I wanted to build a life together. We did that, Laura said, her eyes bright with emotion. We took two broken families and made them whole. We built something beautiful, Daniel, something lasting. We did, he agreed. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They kissed, and their children and grandchildren applauded, laughing and calling out teasing remarks. But Daniel and Laura ignored them all, lost in each other, grateful for every moment they had been given. Laura lived to be 78, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She died peacefully in her sleep with Daniel holding her hand, just as he had held it through all the years of their life together. When Daniel followed her 2 years later, their children buried them side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, in the cemetery where Margaret and Thomas also rested. The headstone reads simply, Daniel and Laura Kade, beloved parents and grandparents, but their true legacy was not in stone. It was in the descendants who carried on their names and their values, in the ranch that still stood strong and prosperous, in the love story that their grandchildren told and retold, about how two people found each other in the darkest moments of their lives and built something beautiful from the ashes of their grief. It was a story about how she had 3 kids who needed a father, and he had 3 who needed a mother, and the cowboy saw that. But more than that, it was a story about love and second chances, about family and faith, about the resilience of the human heart and its capacity to heal and hope and love again. And in the end, it was a story with the happiest of endings, the kind that lasts not just for a lifetime but for generations, rippling out into the future like stones thrown into still water, creating circles of love and light that never truly end.